He wasn't supposed to remember, but the dog did, and it broke him before it broke anyone else. The rain falls softly over a narrow London street, the kind that glistens under amber lamplight and smells faintly of wet stone and passing buses. And in the middle of that quiet, something is wrong, because a German shepherd stands frozen near the curb, unmoving, unblinking, his breath shallow in the cool evening air, and then, without warning, he begins to cry, not bark, not whine, but a low, aching sound that doesn't belong in a dog's throat, a sound that makes strangers slow their steps and glance over their shoulders as if they've heard something human where it shouldn't be. And across the pavement, just meters away, a man keeps walking, hands buried in the pockets of a worn coat, head slightly bowed beneath the drizzle, unaware, or pretending to be, of the way the dog's eyes are locked onto him with a kind of desperate certainty, as though the entire world has narrowed down to that one figure moving away. His name is Oliver Hayes, though no one here calls him that. Not anymore, because names fade when you stop answering to them. And Oliver has spent years becoming quieter, smaller, harder to reach. A former Marine with a steady gait and a stillness that suggests he's always listening for something that never quite comes. His right sleeve pulled just enough to hide the ink beneath. A faded tattoo of a dog's silhouette etched into skin that has seen too much sun and not enough peace. The shepherd takes a step forward, then another, paws hesitant against the slick pavement, and the sound comes again, trembling, raw, as if pulled from somewhere deeper than instinct. And a woman nearby murmurs that the poor thing must be lost, but she doesn't see what the dog sees, the way his body leans toward Oliver, not with curiosity, but recognition, as if a thread invisible to everyone else has suddenly tightened between them. Oliver slows, just slightly, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for something inside him to stir, a flicker he cannot name, and he exhales through his nose, steady, controlled, the way he's learned to do when thoughts come uninvited, because whatever this is, it isn't his, it can't be. He tells himself that as he keeps moving, boots tapping lightly against the pavement, counting steps without meaning to, 1, 2, 3, until the sound behind him doesn't fade, doesn't stop. It follows, soft but persistent, like a memory that refuses to stay buried. The shepherd doesn't run, doesn't leap, he simply follows at a distance, each step measured, each breath uneven, and his eyes never leave the man ahead, not even when a car passes between them, not even when a cyclist brushes past and mutters under his breath, because something older than fear is guiding him now, something that smells like rain and iron and a hand that once reached through smoke and didn't let go. Oliver reaches the corner and pauses, not because he wants to, but because his body betrays him, and he glances back, just a fraction, enough to catch a glimpse of sable fur and amber eyes shining too brightly under the streetlight. And for a moment, the world narrows, the noise dims, and there's a pressure in his chest that feels dangerously close to recognition. But he shakes it off, turns away again, because recognition requires memory, and memory is something he has learned to ration carefully, like breath in cold air. Behind him, the dog stops as well, as if respecting an unspoken boundary, and the crying softens into something quieter, almost like a question. And the space between them fills with rain and silence, and the faint echo of something neither of them can fully grasp yet, a man and a dog, strangers to everyone else, bound by something neither has spoken, not here, not now, but the street seems to hold its breath all the same, as if waiting for the moment when one of them will finally turn and face what the other already knows. Because some bonds don't arrive with noise or force, they arrive like this, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary evening, asking to be remembered. The rain grows steadier, not heavier, just enough to soften the edges of everything, to blur the lines between what is seen and what is felt, and Oliver stands at the corner longer than he intends, his breath slow, measured, as if he is deciding something without quite admitting it to himself. And behind him the sound comes again, quieter now, almost restrained, as though the dog is learning to hold its grief in place, waiting for permission that never comes. Oliver exhales and finally turns, not fully, just enough to face the street behind him. And there it is again, that pair of amber eyes, fixed, unwavering, carrying a weight that feels far too familiar for a stranger's gaze. And the shepherd does not move closer this time, does not rush or plead. He simply stands there, chest rising and falling, watching, as if he has all the time in the world, as if he has already found what he came for. "You are not mine," Oliver says under his breath, the words barely audible even to himself, his voice low and even, shaped by years of keeping things contained. But something in the air shifts the moment he speaks, as though the silence between them has been acknowledged, and the dog's ears lift slightly, not in excitement, but in recognition of tone, of presence, of something deeper than language. A bus passes behind Oliver, its engine humming softly, casting a brief wash of light across the pavement. And for a moment the reflection in the wet ground shows them both, man and dog, aligned in a way that feels almost deliberate, like two fragments of the same story placed side by side after too long apart. Oliver rubs his thumb against his palm, an old habit, a grounding motion he does not notice anymore, and then, against his better judgment, he takes a step back toward the pavement he had just left, one step only, measured, cautious, as if approaching something fragile, and the shepherd responds not by advancing, but by lowering himself slightly, not quite sitting, not quite lying down, just enough to make himself smaller, less threatening, though there is no threat in him at all, only a quiet intensity that seems to press gently against Oliver's chest. The distance between them remains, a few meters at most, but it feels like something far greater, something shaped by time rather than space, and Oliver's gaze drops briefly to the ground before lifting again, drawn back despite himself, because there is something in the way the dog looks at him that refuses to be dismissed, something that does not fit into the neat, controlled compartments he has built around his life. A flicker of memory passes through him then, not clear, not whole, just a fragment, the scent of damp earth mixed with something metallic, the weight of a presence beside him that moved without needing instruction, and he inhales sharply, the air cool in his lungs, steadying, but the feeling lingers, like a word on the tip of the tongue that will not quite form. "Go on," he says, softer now, not unkind, just distant, as if speaking to something he cannot claim, and the shepherd tilts his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement, and for the first time there is a shift in his posture, a step forward, tentative, careful, each paw placed with deliberate precision on the wet pavement, closing the distance by inches rather than strides. People continue to pass, some glancing, most not, the world moving as it always does, indifferent to the quiet tension, unfolding in its midst, and yet there is a stillness around them, a subtle pause that seems to belong only to this moment, as if time itself has slowed just enough to let something important surface. Oliver notices the way the dog's gaze flickers briefly to his right arm, to the place where the fabric of his sleeve clings slightly to the skin beneath, and without thinking, his fingers brush against it, adjusting the cuff just a fraction, and the movement is small, almost nothing, but the effect is immediate. The shepherd's breath catches, a soft, sharp intake that breaks the fragile quiet, and that sound, more than anything else, settles something in Oliver's chest, not an answer, not yet, but a shift, a recognition that this is not random, not coincidence, but something that has been waiting, patient and unyielding, for this exact crossing of paths. The dog takes another step, then stops, as if mindful of a boundary he does not wish to break without invitation, and his eyes soften, the intensity giving way to something gentler, something that carries not just recognition, but relief, as though the act of finding has eased a weight he has carried for far too long. Oliver's shoulders lower slightly, tension easing in a way he cannot fully explain, and he watches the dog now without turning away, without dismissing him, and the rain continues to fall, steady, quiet, wrapping the moment in a soft, persistent rhythm that feels almost like breathing, in and out, as if the world itself is waiting with them, holding space for whatever comes next, because some meetings do not announce themselves with certainty. They arrive slowly, cautiously, asking to be seen before they are understood. The space between them feels thinner now, not measured in meters, but in something quieter, something that hums beneath the surface like a note held too long. And Oliver does not step back this time when the shepherd inches closer. He simply stands there, shoulders no longer as rigid, breath no longer as controlled, watching as the dog lowers his head slightly, not in submission, but in something that resembles reverence, as if this moment carries a meaning that cannot be rushed. The rain. If recognizing not the words, but the tone beneath them, a tone that carries memory even when the mind resists. A faint image flickers again behind Oliver's eyes. Not a full scene, just fragments. A narrow corridor of light cutting through dust, the steady presence of something moving beside him. Close enough to feel, silent enough to trust, and he exhales slowly, the breath catching just slightly before he steadies it. Because whatever this is, it is beginning to press too close to something he has kept carefully sealed. The dog takes one final step forward, closing the distance entirely, and then he pauses, his head lifting just enough to align with Oliver's hand, not touching, not yet, but hovering there, as if waiting for permission that only Oliver can give. And for a long moment, nothing happens. The city continues around them, distant footsteps, the hum of traffic, the soft rhythm of rain. But here, in this small pocket of stillness, everything feels suspended. Oliver's hand shifts almost imperceptibly, fingers loosening at his side, and there is a hesitation in him that runs deeper than uncertainty. It is the hesitation of someone who knows that a single action may open something he is not ready to face. And yet, despite that, his hand lifts, slowly, deliberately, moving through the cool air between them until it hovers just above the dog's head. The shepherd does not move, does not lean in. He simply waits, eyes soft now, no longer searching, no longer pleading, only present, as if the act of being here is enough. Oliver's fingers brush against the fur at last, light, tentative, and the moment contact is made, something shifts, not outwardly, not in a way that anyone passing by would notice, but internally, a quiet, undeniable shift, like a door opening just a fraction in a room long kept closed. The dog exhales, a long, trembling breath that carries relief more than emotion, and his body lowers slightly, leaning into the touch without force, without steadiness. It aligns with something stored deep within him, something that has no name yet. His fingers pause, resting there, and he swallows, the motion subtle but deliberate, because there is a tightening in his throat that does not belong to the present moment. It belongs to something older, something unresolved, and he closes his eyes briefly, just a second, just enough to steady himself. But in that second, the fragments return, clearer this time, a hand reaching out, not his, or perhaps it is, pulling something small and trembling from a place filled with noise and confusion, a pair of eyes meeting his, not in fear, but in trust, absolute and immediate. Oliver's eyes open again, sharper now, focused, and he looks down at the shepherd with a different gaze, one that searches rather than deflects, and the dog meets it without hesitation, holding it steady, as if confirming something that Oliver is only just beginning to understand. His hand shifts slightly, fingers brushing along the side of the dog's neck, and there, beneath the damp fur, he feels it, a faint ridge, a subtle imperfection, not visible at first glance, but unmistakable once noticed, and something about that detail lands heavily, like a piece of a puzzle falling into place without warning. Oliver's breath catches again, deeper this time, and he pulls his hand back just slightly, not breaking contact entirely, but enough to look more closely, his mind racing now in a way it has not in years. Connecting fragments, aligning sensations, building something that feels dangerously close to truth. The rain continues to fall, steady and unchanging, but the moment has shifted, the quiet uncertainty replaced by something more urgent, more defined, and Oliver feels it clearly now. The pull of recognition no longer distant, no longer vague, but approaching, step by careful step, as if the past itself is finding its way back through the simplest of gestures, through the touch of a hand, through, let's go. And the shepherd leans into it just enough to confirm that it is real, that this is happening, that the distance that once existed between them has already begun to close in ways neither of them can undo. The faint ridge beneath the fur stays beneath Oliver's fingertips, unmistakable now, a detail too precise to ignore, and his breath slows again, not out of control, but because something inside him is beginning to settle into place with a quiet, almost reluctant certainty. The street. continues to breathe around them. The hum of passing traffic, the distant echo of footsteps, the soft hiss of tires against wet road. But it all feels further away now, as though the world has stepped back to make room for something that has been waiting patiently beneath the surface. Oliver lowers himself slightly, not quite kneeling, but enough to bring himself closer to the dog's level, and the movement is instinctive, unplanned, something his body remembers before his mind allows it, and the shepherd responds in kind, lifting his head just a fraction, eyes never leaving Oliver's face, as if searching for the moment when recognition fully arrives. "Where did you come from?" Oliver murmurs, but the question carries no expectation of an answer. It is not meant for the dog. It is meant for the space between them, for the weight that has settled there, and the shepherd exhales softly. The sound almost like a quiet acknowledgement, not of the words, but of the presence behind them. Oliver's thumb shifts slightly, brushing along the same spot again, tracing the line beneath the fur, and this time the memory does not come in fragments. It comes as a feeling first, a pull, a sense of reaching through something dense and uncertain towards something small and alive. And then the image follows, faint but undeniable, a moment of stillness in the middle of chaos, a pair of eyes meeting his, not questioning, not afraid, simply trusting, and his chest tightens, not painfully, but with a weight that feels earned, as though it has been carried silently for far too long. The shepherd lowers himself further now, front legs bending as he settles into the wet pavement, not out of weakness, but in a gesture that feels deliberate, intentional, as if offering himself to the moment, as if saying without words that he is here, that he has always been here, waiting, remembering. Oliver studies him more closely now, not just the fur, not just the posture, but the presence itself, the quiet discipline, the way the dog holds still even when everything in him seems to want to move closer. And something in that restraint resonates deeply, because it mirrors something Oliver knows all too well, the act of holding back, of containing what could overwhelm if allowed to surface too quickly. A car slows briefly as it passes, the driver glancing at the scene before moving on, unaware of the significance contained in such a simple interaction, and Oliver almost envies that, the ability to see this as nothing more than a man and a dog in the rain. Because for him it is becoming something far more complex, something layered with meaning he cannot yet fully articulate. His hand moves. Again, more confidently this time, fingers pressing gently into the thick fur, and the shepherd responds with a subtle shift, leaning closer, closing what little space remains. And in that contact there is a quiet exchange, not of ownership, not of command, but of recognition, something mutual, something that does not need to be spoken to exist. Oliver's gaze softens, the guarded edge giving way to something more open, more searching, and he lets out a slow breath, one that carries with it a trace of something he has not allowed himself to feel in a long time. Not quite relief, not quite sorrow, but something that sits between them, bridging the gap between past and present. "You remember," he says quietly, and this time it is not a question, it is a statement, tentative but grounded, and the shepherd's response is immediate, not in sound, but in presence, his body stilling completely, his gaze steady, as if confirming the truth of those words without needing to express it in any other way. Oliver's hand trembles just slightly, a subtle movement that would go unnoticed by anyone else, but to him it feels significant, because it marks the moment where control gives way to something deeper, something more honest. And he lowers himself further now, one knee nearly touching the wet pavement, bringing himself level with the dog, and for a brief second, their foreheads almost meet, not quite touching, but close enough that the warmth between them is undeniable. The rain continues to fall, soft and persistent, threading through the quiet space they share, and Oliver closes his eyes for a moment, not to escape, but to feel, to allow the memory to settle without resistance, and when he opens them again, the shepherd is still there, unchanged, unwavering, as if he has been waiting for this exact moment all along. Oliver exhales slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing in a way that feels unfamiliar, almost foreign, and he does not pull away this time. He does not retreat into distance or doubt. He stays, hand resting against the dog, gaze steady, because something has shifted now, something irreversible. And though the full truth has not yet formed, the path toward it is clear, laid out in quiet steps, in steady breath, in the simple, undeniable presence of a dog who has never forgotten what Oliver is only just beginning to remember. The word settles between them like something fragile finally spoken aloud, and Oliver feels it echo deeper than he expects, not just in his thoughts but in his chest, in the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing, as though the act of saying it has unlocked something that cannot be closed again. The shepherd does not move away, does not break the quiet connection. He simply remains where he is, eyes steady, body grounded, as if he has been waiting not for recognition itself, but for this exact moment when it is spoken, acknowledged, allowed to exist in the open. Oliver studies him again, but now there is no distance in his gaze, no guarded edge, only a quiet urgency, a need to understand what has already begun to reveal itself, and his hand shifts slightly, fingers tracing along the dog's neck, slower now, more deliberate, as though mapping something he once knew by instinct. The faint ridge beneath the fur leads his touch to a small patch where the coat changes subtly, and there, just beneath the surface, he feels the shape. Again, clearer now, not just a mark, but a memory held in flesh. And this time the image does not hesitate. It rises fully, unbroken, filling the space behind his eyes with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt. A cold morning, not here, not this city, but somewhere quieter, somewhere where the air carried a different weight, and there had been a crate, rough wood, damp from the night, and a sound barely louder than breath. Something alive but fading, and Oliver had knelt then much like he does now, not thinking, not calculating, simply responding to the presence of something that needed to be seen. His fingers had found the same place, the same ridge, though it had been smaller then, less defined, and the dog, not yet grown, had trembled beneath his touch, not from fear, but from exhaustion, from the simple effort of staying alive. Oliver inhales sharply as the memory settles, his hand pausing where it rests, and he looks at the shepherd again, truly looks now, not as a stranger, not as a possibility, but as something known, something real, and the weight of that recognition lands softly but firmly, like a truth that does not need to announce itself loudly to be understood. "You were there," he says, the words quiet but certain, and this time his voice carries something different, something closer to wonder than restraint, and the shepherd responds with a small shift, leaning forward just enough that his forehead brushes lightly against Oliver's hand, a gesture so gentle it feels almost reverent, as if confirming what has already been found. The rain continues its steady fall, but it no longer feels cold, no longer distant. It becomes part of the moment, a quiet rhythm that wraps around them, softening the edges of everything else, and Oliver lowers himself fully now, one knee touching the pavement without hesitation, bringing him level with the dog in a way that feels natural, inevitable. His other hand comes forward, not rushed, not uncertain, and he places it gently against the shepherd's shoulder, feeling the warmth beneath the damp fur, the steady presence that has remained unchanged despite the years that have passed. "I thought," he begins, but the sentence does not finish, because the thought itself does not need to be spoken. It is already understood, already shared in the silence between them. The shepherd exhales again, softer this time, and his body relaxes in a way that suggests not relief alone, but recognition fulfilled, as though the search that brought him here has reached its end not in noise or movement, but in stillness, in the simple act of being seen again. Oliver's hands remain where they are, grounding him in the present, even as the past settles into place around him, and he closes his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to hold the moment steady, to let it settle without resistance. And when he opens them again, there is no hesitation left, no distance, only a quiet certainty that feels both new and deeply familiar. "I remember you," he says, and this time the words do not carry doubt. They carry truth, simple and complete. And the shepherd responds not with sound, but with presence, leaning closer, closing the last of the space between them, his head resting lightly against Oliver's chest as if it has always belonged there. The city continues around them, unaware, unchanged, but for Oliver, everything has shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but in a quieter, more lasting way, like a door that has finally been opened after years of being kept shut. And he does not question it, does not resist it. He simply stays where he is, hands steady, breath even, allowing the moment to exist exactly as it is. Because some recognitions do not arrive with certainty, they arrive with presence, with memory, with the quiet understanding that something once found has never truly been lost. The contact remains, steady and unbroken, and for the first time since the moment began, Oliver does not feel the need to question it. He simply breathes with it, the rhythm of the dog against him slow and grounded, as though something long unsettled has finally found a place to rest. The shepherd's head stays lightly pressed against Oliver's chest, not heavy, not demanding, just present, and Oliver's hands, once careful and measured, now move with a quiet certainty, fingers brushing along the line of the dog's back, tracing the shape of a life that has carried itself through time to find him again. The rain softens further, almost a mist now, clinging to the air rather than falling through it, and the street around them seems to fade into a distant backdrop, voices muted, movement blurred, as if the world has stepped aside to allow this moment to settle fully into place. Oliver exhales slowly, deeper than before, and there is a subtle shift in the way he holds himself, a release not of tension alone, but of something heavier, something that has been carried without name or form. And he does not rush to fill the silence with words, because the silence itself feels complete, filled with understanding that does not require explanation. The shepherd lifts his head slightly then, not to pull away, but to look up, to meet Oliver's gaze directly. And there is something different in his eyes now, no longer searching, no longer questioning, only a quiet assurance, as if he has already accepted what Oliver is still learning to hold. Oliver meets that gaze without hesitation, and for a moment, everything aligns, the past, the present, the unspoken thread that connects them, all of it settling into a single, undeniable truth that does not need to be explained to be felt. "You waited," Oliver says softly, the words almost lost beneath the sound of the rain, but they carry weight, not of guilt, not of regret, but of recognition, and the shepherd's ears shift slightly, a small movement that acknowledges the sound without breaking the stillness. Oliver's hand moves to the side of the dog's face, fingers resting gently along the jaw, and he feels the warmth there, the steady presence that has not wavered, and something in that steadiness reaches deeper than anything else, because it is not conditional, not dependent on time or circumstance. It simply is. A memory returns then, not sharp, not overwhelming, but clear enough to understand the moment after the rescue, the quiet that followed, the way the small body had leaned into him without hesitation, trusting something it could not name, and Oliver had not stayed, not out of neglect, but because that was never the way things worked. Moments passed, duties shifted, lives moved on, and yet here, now, the result of that single moment stands before him, unchanged in its essence. Oliver's thumb brushes lightly along the dog's cheek, and he lets out a breath that feels different from the others, not controlled, not measured, but natural, unguarded, as if something within him has finally allowed itself to settle. "I did not think," he begins again, but the words fade, because what he did not think no longer matters. What matters is what stands in front of him now, what has found its way back without being called. The shepherd shifts his weight slightly, stepping closer, closing what little space remains, and then he does something simple, something so small it could be overlooked by anyone else. He places his paw gently against Oliver's knee, not pressing, not pulling, just resting it there. A quiet gesture that speaks more clearly than anything else could. Oliver looks down at it, at the deliberate placement, at the trust in that small act, and something in his chest tightens again. But this time it is not uncertainty. It is something closer to understanding, something that feels earned rather than given. He nods once, almost to himself, as if acknowledging a truth that has finally settled into place, and his hand moves again, more assured now, stroking along the dog's neck, steady, grounding, as though he is anchoring both of them in this moment. The rain continues to fall, but it no longer feels like an intrusion. It becomes part of the quiet, part of the rhythm that surrounds them, and Oliver realizes then that he is no longer aware of the cold, no longer aware of the time, because something far more important has taken hold, something that does not measure itself in minutes or distance, but in presence, in connection. The shepherd lowers himself again, settling at Oliver's side rather than in front of him, aligning himself in a way that feels instinctive, as though this is where he belongs, not ahead, not behind, but beside. And Oliver does not question it. He does not redirect. He simply accepts it, because it feels right in a way that cannot be explained. Oliver remains there for a moment longer, hand resting against the dog, gaze steady, and then slowly, without breaking the contact, he rises to his feet, the movement careful, deliberate, and the shepherd rises with him, matching the motion without hesitation, without command, as though guided by something deeper than instruction. They stand there together for a brief second, side by side, the space between them no longer uncertain, no longer undefined, and Oliver glances down once more, meeting the dog's eyes with a quiet understanding that was not there before. He turns then, not away, but forward, and after a single step, he pauses, just enough to feel the presence beside him. And when he continues, the shepherd moves with him, not following, not leading, but walking at his side, as if that is where he has always been meant to be, as if the distance that once separated them has finally, quietly, come to an end. They move together without speaking, their pace unhurried, measured not by destination but by presence, and the sound of their steps blends softly with the fading rain, each footfall steady, grounded, as if something long uncertain has finally found its rhythm. Oliver does not look down often, but he feels it, the quiet alignment at his side, the way the shepherd matches him without effort, without command, not trailing behind like a follower, nor pressing ahead like a guide, simply there, exactly where he should be. And that alone is enough to keep Oliver's thoughts from drifting too far into the past, because this moment, this simple act of walking together, demands his attention in a way that feels both new and deeply familiar. The street begins to open into a wider road, the lamps spaced further apart, casting longer reflections across the wet pavement, and Oliver turns slightly without thinking, his body choosing a direction before his mind does, and the shepherd follows the shift instantly, adjusting his stride with a precision that does not need to be taught, only remembered. A few people pass them now, glancing briefly at the pair, perhaps noticing the way the dog stays so close without a lead, perhaps sensing something unusual in the quiet bond between them. But no one stops, no one asks, because from the outside it appears simple, ordinary even, a man and his dog walking through the evening, and Oliver finds a strange comfort in that, in the way something so significant can appear so small to the rest of the world. He exhales slowly, the breath visible in the cool air, and for a moment he allows himself to feel the weight of what has changed, not as a burden, but as a presence, something steady and real that has settled beside him. The shepherd's ears flick once at a distant sound, a passing vehicle perhaps, but he does not break stride, does not drift away. His focus remains where it has been since the moment they met, anchored to Oliver with a quiet certainty that does not demand attention, only acknowledges it. Oliver's hand shifts slightly at his side, fingers brushing against the damp fabric of his coat, and then, almost without thought, he lowers it again, letting it hover briefly before resting lightly against the dog's back as they walk, the contact subtle, steady, a reassurance given without words, and the shepherd responds with the faintest adjustment, leaning just enough to meet the touch, not pressing into it, not seeking more, simply accepting what is offered. They pass a small row of shops, their windows dimly lit, reflections blurred by the lingering moisture on the glass, and Oliver's gaze lingers there for a second, not because he is interested in what lies inside, but because the reflection shows them again, side by side, moving as one. And this time he does not look away, he watches it, allowing the image to settle, to become something real rather than fleeting. A memory surfaces then, softer than before, not sharp or intrusive, but steady, like a voice remembered rather than heard. The feeling of movement beside him, of shared direction, of trust that did not need to be questioned. And he realizes that what he feels now is not entirely new. It is something that has existed before, only lost beneath the noise of time. You kept going, Oliver murmurs, not expecting a response, the words more for himself than for the dog. But the shepherd's ear turns slightly at the sound, acknowledging it in the smallest way. And that is enough, because the connection between them no longer relies on clear answers or defined roles. It exists in the space between gestures, between breaths, between steps taken in quiet agreement. The road curves gently ahead, leading toward a quieter stretch where the traffic thins and the lights grow softer, and Oliver slows just a fraction, not stopping, just enough to feel the presence beside him more clearly. And the shepherd mirrors the change instantly, adjusting. Without hesitation, his body language calm, assured, as if he has always known how to walk this path. Oliver glances down then, meeting the dog's gaze briefly, and there is no question in it now, no searching, only recognition, steady and complete, and he nods once. A small gesture that carries more meaning than any words could, because it acknowledges not just the present moment, but everything that led to it. The shepherd's tail moves once, slow and deliberate, not wagging in excitement, but in quiet contentment, as though this simple act of walking beside Oliver is all he has needed, all he has been waiting for, and Oliver feels that too. The simplicity of it, the way something so profound can exist without noise, without urgency, just in the steady rhythm of shared movement. They continue on, the rain now little more than a memory in the air, the city settling into its evening calm. And Oliver no longer feels the need to question where he is going, because wherever that is, he knows he will not be walking there alone. Not anymore, not after this, because some paths are not chosen. They are found, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary evening, when something long remembered finally steps back into place and refuses to be left behind. The road narrows as they move further from the busier streets, the sound of the city softening into something distant and almost forgettable, and Oliver finds himself slowing without realizing, not out of hesitation, but because there is no longer any urgency in his steps, no need to arrive anywhere other than where he already is. The shepherd adjusts beside him instantly, matching the pace with the same quiet precision. His presence steady, grounded, as if this rhythm is something he has always known, something that does not need to be taught, only followed. The air carries the faint scent of damp brick and evening chill, and the lamplight stretches longer across the pavement, casting their shadows side by side in a way that feels almost deliberate, like a reflection of something deeper than simple coincidence. Oliver glances down briefly, not to check, not to confirm, but because the presence beside him has become something he is aware of without needing to look. And when their eyes meet again, there is no question left in his gaze, only a quiet understanding that settles deeper with each step they take. They reach a small park, its iron gates slightly ajar, the path beyond glistening under the soft glow of distant lights, and Oliver pauses there, just for a moment, as though the threshold itself carries meaning he cannot quite name, and the shepherd stops with him, not moving ahead, not pulling back, simply waiting, as if allowing Oliver to choose the next step. Oliver exhales slowly and steps forward, pushing the gate open just enough to pass through, and the shepherd follows without hesitation, his movement smooth, silent, as though he has walked beside Oliver like this many times before. Inside, the park is quieter still, the sounds of the street fading almost entirely, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves and the soft echo of their footsteps against the path. And Oliver feels something shift again, not sharply, but gently, like a memory settling into place rather than forcing itself forward. They walk along the curved path, the grass dark with moisture, the trees standing still against the night air, and Oliver's hand drifts once more to the shepherd's back, resting there without thought, without hesitation, and this time the contact feels natural, unremarkable, as though it has always been there. The shepherd leans into it slightly, not seeking more, not asking for anything, simply acknowledging the presence with a quiet acceptance that mirrors Oliver's own. A bench appears ahead, worn but sturdy, its surface glistening faintly under the light, and Oliver slows again, then stops, turning slightly as he lowers himself onto it. The motion unhurried, deliberate, and the shepherd moves with him, settling at his feet first, then shifting closer until he rests beside him, close enough that their sides nearly touch. Oliver sits still for a moment, hands resting loosely, gaze unfocused as he looks out across the darkened grass. And the silence that settles between them is not empty. It is full, filled with something that does not need to be spoken, something that simply exists in the shared space they now occupy. The shepherd lifts his head slightly, resting it against Oliver's leg, the weight gentle, steady, and Oliver looks down at him, his expression softening in a way that would go unnoticed by anyone else. But here, in this quiet, it feels significant, like the final piece of something falling into place. "You found me," Oliver says quietly, the words simple, unembellished, and yet they carry a depth that reaches beyond the moment, beyond the park, beyond the city itself. And the shepherd's eyes remain steady, calm, as if confirming that this was never in doubt. Oliver's hand moves again, fingers brushing through the fur with a slow, absent rhythm, not searching now, not tracing, simply present. And as he does, another memory surfaces, softer than the others, not tied to urgency or uncertainty, but to stillness, to a moment of quiet after everything else had settled, where presence alone had been enough. He lets out a slow breath, longer this time, and leans back slightly against the bench, the tension in his shoulders easing fully for the first time. And he realizes then that the weight he has carried for so long is not gone, but it has shifted. It has found somewhere to rest, somewhere outside of him, shared, understood without needing to be explained. The shepherd remains close, unmoving except for the steady rise and fall of his breathing, and Oliver notices the rhythm, how it aligns with his own, how it steadies something within him that he had not realized was unsettled. Time passes quietly, unmeasured, the park holding its stillness, the world beyond continuing without interruption, and Oliver does not rush to leave, does not feel the need to move, because for the first time in a long while, there is nowhere else he needs to be. He glances down once more, meeting the shepherd's gaze, and there is something unspoken there, something that does not need to be defined, only acknowledged, and he nods slightly, a small gesture that carries a quiet promise, not of what comes next, but of what will not be lost again. The shepherd's tail shifts once against the ground, slow and deliberate, and he lowers his head again, settling into the space beside Oliver as though it has always belonged to him. And Oliver remains there, hand resting gently against him, eyes steady, breath even, allowing the moment to settle fully, because some reunions do not end with movement or words, they end in stillness, in the quiet understanding that something once found has come back, not to change everything, but to stay. The stillness lingers long after the rain has faded into nothing more than a memory on the air, and Oliver does not rush to break it. He sits there with his hands resting lightly against the shepherd's fur, feeling the quiet rhythm of breath beneath his palm, as though each rise and fall is anchoring him to something steady, something real. The park holds its silence gently, the distant hum of the city softened into a low, constant murmur, and the lamps cast a warm glow that settles over the path like a quiet reassurance. And for a while, neither of them moves, because movement is no longer necessary, not when everything that needed to happen has already begun. Oliver's gaze drifts across the open space ahead, but he is not really seeing it, not the trees or the damp grass or the empty path. His attention is turned inward now, following the thread of memory that has finally begun to unravel in full. And it comes not as a single moment, but as a series of quiet fragments, each one fitting into the next with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt. He remembers the weight of that small body the first time he held it, lighter than it should have been, fragile in a way that had demanded care without asking for it. And he remembers the eyes, not fearful, not uncertain, but steady, watching him with a trust that had felt undeserved and yet completely given. His fingers move slightly now, brushing along the shepherd's neck again, not searching, not questioning, but acknowledging, and the dog responds with a soft shift, pressing closer for a moment before settling again, as if recognizing the change in Oliver's touch, the difference between hesitation and certainty. "I left you," Oliver says quietly, the words not heavy, not filled with regret, but simple, honest, and the shepherd does not react with confusion or distance. He remains where he is, his presence unchanged, because whatever that moment once meant, it does not define what stands between them now. Oliver exhales slowly, and there is something in that breath that feels like release, not of guilt, but of misunderstanding, because he begins to see it clearly now, that what he thought had been an ending had not been one at all. It had simply been a moment in a path that continued, unseen, until it led back here. The shepherd lifts his head slightly, turning it just enough to meet Oliver's gaze again, and there is no accusation in it, no question, only a quiet steadiness that feels almost like reassurance, as if the dog has never once doubted the outcome of this meeting, as if time itself had been nothing more than distance waiting to close. Oliver's hand moves to the top of the dog's head, resting there gently, fingers threading through the damp fur with a familiarity that no longer feels uncertain, and he nods once, not to the dog, not to himself, but to the moment, to the truth that has settled fully now. A faint sound drifts through the park then, distant footsteps approaching along the path, and Oliver glances up briefly, noticing a figure passing by without paying much attention, just another presence moving through the evening. Unaware of the quiet significance unfolding on the bench, the shepherd does not react, does not shift his focus. He remains anchored where he is, his attention fixed entirely on Oliver, and that unwavering presence feels more grounding than anything else, because it carries no expectation, no demand, only a quiet understanding that does not need to be spoken. Oliver leans forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, and the movement brings him closer still, narrowing the space between them until it no longer feels like two separate beings sharing a moment, but something more unified, something aligned. "You came back," he murmurs, and this time there is a hint of something softer in his voice, not surprise, not disbelief, but something closer to gratitude, though he does not name it as such. He simply lets it exist in the space between them. The shepherd's tail shifts, once against the damp ground, a slow, deliberate motion that carries no urgency, only quiet contentment, and he lowers his head again, resting it more fully against Oliver's leg, as though settling into a place he has already chosen, already claimed without needing permission. The air grows cooler as the evening deepens, and Oliver becomes aware of it only faintly, because the warmth beside him offsets it, not in temperature, but in presence, in the simple fact that he is no longer alone in a way that matters. Time continues to pass, unnoticed, unmeasured, and Oliver does not feel the need to check it, does not feel the pull of elsewhere, because here, in this quiet corner of the park, something has been restored, not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but in a manner that feels lasting, like a piece of himself returned without warning. He straightens slightly after a while, drawing in a deeper breath, and his hand remains where it is, steady, grounded, and the shepherd responds with a subtle shift, preparing to move when Oliver does, not because he must, but because he chooses to, because this is where he belongs now. Oliver glances down one more time, meeting those steady amber eyes, and there is no question left in his expression, no uncertainty, only a quiet acceptance of what has been found and what will not be lost again. And he rises slowly, the motion unhurried, and the shepherd rises with him, seamless, natural, as though they have already done this 1,000 times before. They stand side by side once more, the bench behind them, the path ahead open and waiting, and Oliver takes a single step forward, not looking back, not hesitating, because he no longer needs to wonder what walks beside him. He already knows, and as they move together into the quiet of the evening, there is a sense not of something beginning, but of something continuing exactly as it was always meant to. The path ahead stretches quietly beyond the park gates, the city breathing in a slower rhythm now as evening settles fully into night, and Oliver steps forward without hesitation, the soft gravel beneath his boots giving way to the smoother pavement beyond, while beside him the shepherd moves in perfect sync, not guided, not instructed, simply present in a way that feels both natural and deliberate. The air carries a faint chill now, sharper than before, brushing lightly against Oliver's face. But he does not pull his coat tighter, does not quicken his pace, because something within him has shifted beyond the reach of such small discomforts, something steadier, something grounded in the quiet presence at his side. They pass beneath a row of dim street lamps, their light casting long shadows that move together across the pavement, never separating, never falling out of step, and Oliver notices it without meaning to. The way the shadows mirror what he feels, not as two separate forms, but as something aligned, something shared. His hand lowers again, resting briefly against the shepherd's back as they walk. The gesture no longer tentative, no longer uncertain, and the dog leans into it with the same quiet acceptance, not seeking more, not asking for anything beyond what is already given. And that simplicity settles deeper within Oliver than any words could. The streets grow quieter as they move further from the center, the sounds of traffic fading into a distant hum, replaced by the occasional echo of footsteps or the faint rustle of wind against buildings. And Oliver becomes aware of how different this feels, not the city itself, but his place within it, no longer moving through it alone, no longer detached from the world around him, but connected, grounded, anchored by something he had not realized he was missing. A small shop window reflects them as they pass, the glass slightly fogged from the warmth inside, and Oliver catches the image. In passing, his gaze lingering for just a moment, long enough to see the two figures moving side by side, steady, unbroken, and this time he does not look away. He lets the reflection stay with him, lets it settle as something real rather than fleeting. The shepherd's ears flick once at a distant sound, but his stride does not change. His focus remains steady, aligned with Oliver's movement. And there is something in that quiet discipline that feels deeply familiar, not as a memory now, but as a presence, something that has returned not just to be recognized, but to remain. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath visible in the cool air, and there is a softness in it now, a release that does not come from forgetting, but from understanding, from allowing something long unresolved to find its place without resistance. "We move forward," he says quietly, the words simple, almost instinctive, and the shepherd responds in the only way he needs to, by continuing at his side, unwavering, as though the direction has never been in question. The pavement stretches ahead, illuminated in patches by the scattered lights, and Oliver's steps remain steady, unhurried, each one grounded in the present rather than pulled by the past, and the dog matches him without effort, their rhythm aligning in a way that feels less like coordination and more like recognition. A gentle breeze passes through the street, carrying with it the faint scent of rain that has already passed, and Oliver notices it. Only in passing, because his attention remains where it has settled, on the quiet presence beside him, on the steady companionship that has returned without demand or expectation. They approach a crossing, the signal glowing softly at the edge of the pavement, and Oliver pauses, not out of necessity, but out of habit, and the shepherd stops with him instantly, his body still, attentive, waiting without tension. And Oliver glances down briefly, meeting his gaze once more, and there is something in that brief exchange that feels complete, as though no further confirmation is needed. When the light changes, Oliver steps forward again, and the shepherd moves with him, seamless, precise, their steps crossing together as if they have done so countless times before, though the truth of it matters less now than the feeling of it, the certainty that this is where they belong, together, moving in the same direction. The other side of the road opens into a quieter stretch, lined with modest buildings and dim lights, and Oliver continues without pause, his posture relaxed in a way that would have seemed unfamiliar not long ago. And the dog remains close, not pressed against him, not distant, but exactly where he should be, neither leading nor following, simply walking beside him as though that has always been the case. Time passes without measure, each step blending into the next, and Oliver realizes that he is no longer thinking about where he is going, no longer questioning what comes next, because the answer is already present in the quiet rhythm of their movement, in the steady alignment of their path. He glances down one more time, a brief, natural motion, and the shepherd looks back up, eyes calm, assured, and Oliver nods slightly, a small gesture that carries more meaning than any spoken word, because it acknowledges not just the present moment, but the continuity of it, the understanding that what has been found will not be set aside again. They continue on, the city stretching quietly around them, the night settling deeper with each step, and there is no sense of urgency, no need to rush. Because this is not a beginning or an end, it is something else entirely. Something quieter, something lasting, a continuation of a path that had never truly been broken, only paused, waiting for the moment when both would be ready to walk it again, side by side, without hesitation, without doubt, simply moving forward together. The quiet stretch of road seems to lengthen with each step they take, not in distance but in feeling, as though time itself has eased its grip, allowing the moment to breathe without interruption, and Oliver continues forward with a steadiness that no longer feels forced, no longer measured against anything behind him, but guided by something present, something certain, and beside him the shepherd maintains that same effortless alignment, his stride neither hurried nor delayed, matching Oliver not by command but by choice. The buildings along the street grow more familiar now, their shapes and outlines carrying a quiet recognition, and Oliver's gaze lifts slightly as he notices the subtle details he once overlooked, the worn brickwork, the dim lights behind curtained windows, the stillness that settles into a neighborhood when the evening has fully arrived. And there is something in that familiarity that feels different now, not isolating, not distant, but connected, as though the space around him has shifted in response to the presence at his side. His hand moves again, almost unconsciously, brushing along the shepherd's back in a slow, grounding motion, and the dog responds with a slight lean, not pressing, not seeking, simply acknowledging the contact with the same quiet acceptance that has defined every step they have taken together. They pass a narrow alleyway, the shadows deeper there, untouched by the lamplight, and Oliver's gaze flickers toward it for a brief moment, not out of caution, but out of habit, the kind that lingers long after it is needed. And yet there is no tension in his shoulders this time, no tightening of breath, because the presence beside him anchors him in a way that does not allow those old instincts to take hold. "It is different now," he murmurs softly, the words carrying no urgency, only observation. And though the shepherd does not respond in any outward way, his steady pace, his unwavering position at Oliver's side, answers more clearly than any sound could. The road curves gently ahead, leading toward a quieter residential lane, and Oliver follows it without hesitation, his steps guided less by direction and more by a quiet sense of belonging that has returned without announcement. A soft light glows ahead from a small doorway, casting a warm circle onto the pavement, and as they approach, Oliver slows just slightly, his gaze resting on it longer than necessary, as though something about that simple glow draws him inward, not as a destination, but as a reflection of something he has not felt in some time, something steady, something safe. The shepherd adjusts his pace instantly, matching the subtle shift, his presence constant, unwavering, and Oliver notices it not as a surprise, but as a reassurance, something he no longer questions, something he accepts as part of the rhythm they have found together. A faint breeze moves through the street, carrying with it the distant scent of rain that has already passed, and Oliver inhales slowly, the air cool and clean, filling his lungs in a way that feels deeper than before, as though he is no longer holding anything back, no longer bracing against something unseen. "You stayed," he says quietly, the words barely more than a breath, but they carry weight, not of expectation, not of demand, but of recognition, and the shepherd's ears flick slightly at the sound, a small acknowledgement that feels enough, more than enough, because what matters is not the response, but the truth behind it. They continue forward, the quiet of the street settling around them like a steady presence, and Oliver becomes aware of how natural it feels now, this movement, this shared path, as though it has always been this way, as though the time in between was nothing more than a pause, a space waiting to be filled again. His hand rests once more against the shepherd's side, fingers pressing lightly into the fur, and the contact feels grounding, real, a reminder that what he has found is not fleeting, not imagined, but solid, present, and unwavering. A window to his left reflects them again, clearer this time. Continuation, a path that unfolds naturally with each step they take, and Oliver no longer measures it in distance or direction. He simply walks, steady, present, aware of the quiet alignment beside him. The night deepens around them, the lights growing softer, the sounds quieter, and Oliver feels no pull to turn back, no sense of uncertainty about what comes next, because whatever that is, it will be met the same way this moment has been, not with resistance, not with doubt, but with a quiet acceptance of what is, and a steady step forward. He glances down once more, meeting the shepherd's gaze in that brief, familiar way, and there is no question left, no hesitation, only a shared understanding that has settled fully between them, and he nods slightly, a small gesture that carries a quiet promise, not spoken, but known, that this time, what has been found will not be left behind. And so they continue, side by side, into the quiet stretch of the night, their steps aligned, their presence steady, moving not towards something new, but along something that has always existed, waiting for the moment when it could be walked again, together, without interruption, without doubt, simply as it was always meant to be. The quiet lane stretches further into the night, and with each step Oliver takes, there is a growing sense that he is not simply walking through familiar streets, but returning to something that had been waiting without urgency, without expectation, and now receives him without question. The soft glow of porch lights and distant windows lines the path ahead, each one a small island of warmth against the cool darkness. And Oliver notices them in a way he has not for a long time, not as passing details, but as quiet signs of life, of presence, of stillness that does not feel empty but full. Beside him, the shepherd continues in that same steady rhythm, his breath calm, his steps even, his presence unwavering, and Oliver no longer needs to check that he is there, no longer feels the need to confirm what he already knows, because the connection has moved beyond awareness into something deeper, something that simply exists. They pass a row of narrow homes, their doors closed, their curtains drawn, and yet there is a quiet sense of belonging in the way Oliver walks among them, as though the distance that once separated him from the world has softened, has eased into something more open, more accepting. His hand lowers again, resting briefly against the shepherd's back, and this time the gesture feels almost instinctive, like breathing, like stepping forward. And the dog responds with that same quiet lean, a subtle shift that carries understanding. Without demand, the air grows cooler still, brushing gently against Oliver's face, and he inhales slowly, deeper than before, allowing it to settle within him. And for the first time in a long while, there is no tension in the breath, no holding back, only a quiet acceptance of the moment as it is. We did not lose it, he says softly, the words forming without effort, not spoken to the night, not even to the dog, but to the space within himself that has finally found its answer. And they approaches, not out of doubt, but out of recognition, as though this place, like the moment itself, carries a quiet significance he does not need to question. He stops just before the gate, his hand resting lightly against it. And for a moment he does not move. He simply stands there, feeling the presence beside him, the stillness around him, the quiet certainty that has settled within him, and the shepherd stops as well, his posture calm, attentive, not waiting for instruction, but present, as if he understands that this pause matters. Oliver exhales slowly, his breath visible in the cool air, and he glances down once more, meeting the dog's gaze in that familiar, steady way. And there is something in that brief exchange that feels like agreement, like a shared understanding that does not need to be spoken aloud. We go on, Oliver says quietly, the words simple, but grounded, and he pushes the gate open, stepping forward without hesitation, and the shepherd follows, his movement seamless, natural, as though there has never been any other place he would be. Inside, the space is quiet, the light softer, the air still, and Oliver pauses again, not because he must, but because he chooses to, allowing the moment to settle fully, to become something complete rather than something passing. The shepherd moves to his side once more, not ahead, not behind, but beside, exactly where he has remained since the moment they found each other again, and Oliver rests his hand gently against him, the contact steady, grounding, a silent confirmation of what has been restored. The night continues beyond the gate, the city moving in its own quiet rhythm. But here, within this small space, there is a sense of stillness that feels lasting, something that does not need to be held tightly to remain, something that simply exists. Oliver stands there for a moment longer, his gaze steady, his breath even, and he realizes that there is no need to look back, no need to measure what has passed, because what matters has already found its place beside him, not as a memory, not as something fleeting, but as something present, something real. And as he takes another step forward, the shepherd, moving with him in that same quiet alignment, there is no sense of ending, no finality, only a continuation, a path that stretches ahead not with uncertainty, but with quiet assurance, as though it has always been there, waiting patiently for the moment when it could be walked again, not alone, but together, in the simple, steady rhythm of steps that no longer need to search for where they belong. The quiet space beyond the gate holds them gently, as though the world outside has been set aside for a moment that does not need to be rushed, and Oliver steps further in, his movements unhurried, grounded, as if each step is no longer taken out of habit, but out of choice, a quiet decision to remain present in something that has already proven itself real. The shepherd follows beside him, as he has without question since the moment their paths aligned again, his presence steady, neither asking nor demanding, simply existing in that same calm certainty that has defined every moment since they found one another. And Oliver feels it now not as something new, but as something returned, something that had always belonged to him even when he could not see it. The light inside the small building is warm, not bright, just enough to soften the edges of the room, and Oliver pauses just within the doorway, allowing his eyes to adjust. But more than that, allowing the moment itself to settle, to become something fully understood rather than something still unfolding. The shepherd steps slightly ahead this time, just a fraction, and then stops, turning his head back toward Oliver, not as a signal, not as a command, but as a quiet invitation, and Oliver meets that look with a calm steadiness that no longer carries hesitation, only understanding. "We are here," Oliver says softly, the words simple, unadorned, and yet they hold a quiet weight, not of arrival, but of acceptance. And the shepherd's posture relaxes just enough to reflect it, a subtle shift that speaks more clearly than any movement could. Oliver steps further inside, his hand brushing lightly against the dog's back as he passes, not as a guide, not as a reassurance, but as a continuation of something already established, something that no longer needs to be questioned or confirmed. The air inside carries a faint warmth, a stillness that contrasts gently with the cool night beyond, and Oliver breathes it in slowly, deeply, allowing it to settle within him. And he realizes then that the tension he has carried for so long has not disappeared. It has simply found its place, no longer pressing against him, no longer demanding to be understood, but resting quietly within the larger whole of what he now feels. The shepherd moves to his side again, as he always does, aligning himself not by instruction, but by instinct, and Oliver glances down briefly, meeting his gaze one last time in that familiar, steady way. And there is nothing left to search for there. No questions, no uncertainty, only a quiet, unwavering truth that has already been accepted. "You never lost it," Oliver murmurs, his voice low, almost a whisper, but steady. And though the words could belong to either of them, they settle between them as something shared, something understood without explanation. The room remains still, the lights soft, the silence full, and Oliver moves a little further in, his steps slow, deliberate, as though he is not just entering a space, but stepping fully into a moment that has been waiting for him. And the shepherd follows, close and constant, his presence unchanged, unwavering. Oliver pauses near the center of the room, turning slightly, not to look back, but to take in what lies before him. And there is no urgency in his gaze, no need to measure or define what comes next, because what matters has already been found, already been restored. He lowers himself slowly into a nearby chair, the movement natural, unforced, and the shepherd settles at his side once more, close enough that their presence remains connected, their breathing aligned in that same quiet rhythm that has carried them here. Oliver rests his hand gently against the dog, fingers threading lightly through the fur, not searching, not tracing, simply present, and the shepherd leans into it with that same quiet acceptance, as though nothing more is needed, as though this simple contact is enough to hold everything that has been understood. Time moves forward, quietly, without interruption, and Oliver does not measure it, does not feel the need to, because the moment itself is not bound by time. It exists fully in its own stillness, complete without needing to be defined. He closes his eyes briefly, not to escape, but to feel, to allow the quiet truth of what has happened to settle completely within him. And when he opens them again, nothing has changed, and yet everything has, because what stands beside him is no longer something uncertain, no longer something to be questioned. It is something known, something that has returned not to remind him of what was lost, but to show him what was never truly gone. Oliver exhales slowly, the breath soft, steady, and he nods once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that carries within it a quiet resolution, not of ending, but of understanding, of acceptance, of something that no longer needs to be held tightly because it cannot be taken away. The shepherd remains where he is, calm, grounded, his presence as steady as it has been from the beginning, and Oliver's hand rests there, unmoving, not because it must, but because it belongs there, because it feels right in a way that does not require explanation. The world beyond continues, unseen, unheard, but here, in this quiet space, there is no need to look outward, no need to seek anything further, because what has been found is enough, more than enough, and as the moment settles into stillness, there is a quiet understanding that lingers, soft and unspoken, that some bonds are not measured by time or distance, but by the simple truth that when they return, they do not ask to be explained. They simply remain, steady and certain, exactly where they were always meant to be.